What if I told you that you could build a professional quality app even if you're not a developer? You see, the skill gap between having a great idea and making that great idea has always been massive. You either needed to build really complex technical skills, you had to be able to pay a lot of money to hire a developer, or you had to use a kind of crappy no-code solution that wouldn't really work. But that ends today. In early March, a tool got released into a closed beta called Manus. And unless you've been hibernating under a very large rock, you've probably at least heard of it. And it has been absolutely rocking my world when it comes to vibe planning a SaaS tool. Not because it can code better than any other tool, but because it can plan better than any other tool. Because most people's AI coding or vibe coding workflows look something like this. Come up with a cool idea, maybe ask AI to help you flesh it out in a kind of vague way, tell Cursor to go build the thing, and then receive some mid-level output that probably doesn't really work the way you really wanted it to. Then maybe you decide Cursor's too hard, Windsurf's too hard, I'm gonna go use Replit or Lovable or one of these other tools and build something that's not really that exciting for me. But that entire situation could be avoided if you learned how to vibe plan effectively, meaning spending more time in the planning process before you actually start coding. And that's what I want to show you in this video. How to take a concept for an app and use Manus to break it down into extreme detail. Now, I've been using this process for the past few weeks, and the results so far have been unbelievable. So if you're already a subscriber, you're gonna love this one. If you're new to the channel, what's up? My name's Sean. I own a few different companies. Some of them are techie SaaS companies. Some of them are not techie at all, local contracting companies. And my channel is all about how I'm applying AI in very concrete, real ways in those companies. And so this video is specifically going to be a great one for you to watch if any of the following are true. Number one, you already vibe code with tools like Cursor, and you're excited when you can find ways to do it better. Number two, you're trying to make the jump over from tools like Replit or Lovable or V0, and you're kind of struggling with it a bit and need some guidance. And number three, maybe you're just a fan of people with magnificent mustaches. As always, if you want any of the prompts that I'm going to be showing in this video, they are given away for free inside my school group. You just need to go sign up. So, what are we going to be doing in this video? First, I'm going to give you a very quick explanation of why Manus is actually so great at what we're about to try to get it to do. Second, I'm going to show you my 3-step planning process inside of Manus. That's project architecture, feature expansion, and detailed task planning. And I'll demonstrate how to use Manus for each of those individual steps. And towards the end, I'm going to show you where Cursor or Windsurf or any other AI-based IDE would fit into that process. So look, if you really love the idea of getting great with AI coding workflows, and you want to take that skill to the next level where you feel like really confident that you could take any abstract idea you have and turn it into a really awesome functioning app, being able to take that idea and launch a real SaaS product, the type you've been dreaming about, or even maybe build a portfolio of small apps or softwares that are building you a bit of passive income, whatever it might be, this video is going to be a game changer for you. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to show you guys something really cool, which is how we're going to take this process over the next few months on this channel and use it to build legitimate businesses. But enough of the chatter. Let's go build this thing. So the thing that's really incredible about Manus, like I said, it's that it can plan out solutions with incredible detail and then go take actions on those plans. Now, the thing that separates this from like a reasoning model like Claude, for example, is that it's really able to do this with extreme accuracy and extreme detail. And it really goes into depth into these plans much more than any of those tools do. In fact, under the hood, Manus is using a lot of those tools. But the real secret sauce that it's bringing to the table is how it plans and how it makes sure it is executing those plans to the fullest extent. And so that's what's been most impressive to me. When you compare the type of output that you get for Manus to a tool like Claude 3.7 with its thinking model, or an O1 Pro mode, or an O1 Pro mode, it blows it out of the water. You can take all of the prompts I'm about to give you and go test it yourself if you really want to. In this video, I'm going to show you what these different stages look like and what the outputs we can really expect look like. So that being said, let's hop into the first stage of this process, which is the project architecture step. So the biggest mistake that non-developers make when they're trying to get started with vibe coding is they do not spend much time planning. They just jump right into writing the code. And it's kind of like trying to build a house without a blueprint. You're going to just end up with a bunch of rooms that don't really connect together properly. Maybe you accidentally build 3 kitchens and all of your bathrooms are missing a sink. Professional developers spend 20 to 30% of their time, if not more, planning out what they are about to build, because they know how hard and how costly it is to do that in the future. If you've ever been involved in an actual SaaS company or startup that was going through this type of transitionary phase where they're rebuilding really old code, you know it can be a disaster. And so the project architecture phase is all about defining those main components of your app, making sure they make sense and making sure they make sense together. And so this creates a very clear model ahead of time so that when we go out to our AI coding tool like Cursor or Windsurf, we are just telling it the exact tasks that we need it to accomplish. We're saying, hey, write the code in logical order and don't miss any of these steps. And so when you have a solid plan in place, you know exactly what to build, exactly what to build it with, the exact steps in that process, and exactly when you're going to need a human to do certain things. And then we can really clearly define how this is all going to interact together so that it works from day one. This helps eliminate that feeling of overwhelm that you can get where you have all of these different things that are getting created. You don't even really know how they work. And next thing you know, you have 5 different pieces of code that technically do the same thing because you were vibing your code the wrong way. And so let me show you exactly how we use this project architecture piece inside of Manus. And so when we hop inside of Manus, it's going to work like it would inside of any other like ChatGPT style interface where we can have a conversation. And so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to paste in our prompt, right? And so this prompt is, again, it's inside of the school group for free, but this is where we're telling it what its goal is, what we're trying to build, how it should act, the sub goals of the process, the format that we want it to return answers in, right? Looking at the different features, what they do, what the requirements are, what technology is involved in this feature. And we have it repeat that process all the way through. And then the one thing that we want to do in here is we want to provide context where we want to tell it exactly what this is supposed to be, right? So I'm telling it, hey, I'm building this AI first news app that can look at headlines and it can scrub political bias and only report the facts of a story, right? So I'm coming in here and I'm just telling it what my MVP in my own mind looks like, right? So I'm just building out some bullet points. I'm saying this is the MVP and this is how I think it should function. And then again, we're just giving it some other information like the tech that we want to use. So you'll notice here, like I'm not even asking for technical specifications yet. I'm saying let's brainstorm the features and kind of think about what's going to be involved at each stage. So think of this like we are super high level, right? We are like eagle's eye view. Imagine for a moment that we're an eagle flying in the clouds above a mountain range. We're looking down and we're trying to see like approximately where it is that we are trying to aim this thing, right? We're looking for our prey. And so we can see here, as soon as we tell it to go, it is doing a lot of research. So it's looking up all of the different tools that we're using, the different libraries, what the best practices are for those things in 2025, different considerations, how they work together, all of that type of stuff. It's really seeking to understand what this thing is and how that's going to fit into the broader architecture of everything we're doing here. Again, it spends a lot of time in the planning stage. And then at the very bottom of this, we get our first output. And so if we wanted to go through and actually look at this, we can see the type of output we are getting. So for every launch feature in our MVP, it's giving us the main feature, right? Like user onboarding and topic selection in the context of this AI news app, right? This is where people are going to select the news outlets that they tend to follow, what it's meant to do, and the main components of that, right? You need to have a registration authentication flow. They need to be able to select topics. We need to understand how much they're interested in these types of topics versus other types of topics, options to skip and just use general news, tutorials explaining how this works. Then we get into, well, what tech is involved in that, right? Well, you're going to have React Native with Expo for the cross-platform UI because I'm building this as a mobile app. We're going to need our Supabase or Firebase for our authentication. We're going to use Postgres to store the user preferences. Other requirements, it's got to be fast, right? There should be a 2-minute onboarding process. We need to map those topics, right? That data structure needs to map what we're doing in the API. So it's doing this for every feature, right? It loops through the next feature. Hey, AI-powered newsfeed, here's what this is supposed to do. It's got to be able to scrub headlines and remove biased language, infinite scroll with a poll to refresh, all of these different things. And like I said, if we just keep scrolling and scrolling, it's doing this for every single piece of our app that we specified in our requirements. And then it also breaks down, like, here are our future features that we could consider building. And so, again, repeating this for every single feature that we have. And then at the very bottom, we have this architecture diagram. And so what I really love about this is we get a good visual understanding of what is about to happen. One of the big problems with a lot of this AI vibe coding stuff, that people build stuff they don't understand at all. And so I really like this stage because it gives us as the user a visual representation of what we are about to build. And so you can think of this like it's almost like the whiteboarding stage. Like we just went through and brainstormed all these features. Well, here's how they're going to connect together, right? The payment service is connected to the Stripe API. You're going to have the auth service, which needs to be connected to how we're authenticating news APIs. It's also going to need to authenticate users, right? All of these different things that are explaining how everything is going to work. And then the thing that I really love, and this is one of the big differences compared with what you are going to get out of a tool like Claude 3.7 or O1 Pro or any other reasoning model, is I asked it, and I baked this into the prompt that you guys will have access to if you go to the school group to download it. I asked it, quiz me on this. Like, ask me more questions. I want to make sure this is really dialed in. What questions and clarifications do you need from me in order to do this well? And it gives you a lot of questions. So if you were to do this in, again, like Claude or whatever, you're going to get a much sparser response. But when we come in here, we're getting like 5 to 10 questions per category, right? What APIs are you going to use? What criteria should be used to determine if a source is credible or not, or if it's just some bullshit, right? Different ways that the AI is going to be implemented. How are we going to manage personalization? How is the AI going to be implemented? What does the user experience need to look like? What's the actual monetization model behind this, and how do we need to apply that to what we're doing, right? Ask a lot of really, really good questions. How are we going to scale this? How many monthly active users are you looking for? How do we want to manage like caching data, right? Starting asking us all these really good questions that are going to be what allows us to build something that doesn't break or suck. And so let's zoom out again, eagle eye view of where we are in this process. We have just determined the high level plan for what we're going to build. This alone isn't enough for us to go pass to a tool like Cursor and get out the type of output that we want. But it is enough for us to pass to the next step of the process. And so instead of giving a tool like Cursor some vague prompt like, hey, go build me an AI news app that can scrub bias out of headlines, we have a very distinct plan with really clear relationships between things already starting to form. And so we can spend some time here really looking and dialing in to make sure that we are planning this in the way that we want it to be. We want to make sure every feature we're envisioning is really fleshed out, that we're answering all of the questions that we would want to answer so that we can build something robust, that's awesome, that works. And so this clarity is what separates successful projects from the growing pile of abandoned 20% complete dreams. Now, with our architecture in place, which we've just done, we need to swoop down like the eagle to get a closer look at things. Meaning we need to define exactly what each piece needs to think about doing. For example, with our infinite scroll feature in the newsfeed, how is that going to actually look? How is it going to behave? What API endpoints do we need in place on the back end so that it can do an infinite scroll? Those are the sorts of things that we're going to swoop down and start looking at. And so this is where a lot of people get stuck, but luckily it is what our next step is meant to solve, the feature expansion step, because it helps us move toward a world where we are solving these problems step by step. But before we move on to that, let's take a second and appreciate what you have just accomplished. In just a few minutes, you've created a really professional, high quality plan that would have taken, if you knew what you were doing, weeks or months to really plan out, or years learning how to actually develop software so that you would know how to build this type of plan in the first place. And so this is the power of combining AI with human creativity into our workflows. You provide the mission, and tools like Manus provide the technical expertise to help accomplish that mission. And so step number 2 is feature expansion. So even with like a solid architecture, a lot of AI projects fail because the system's not great at seeing how all of the different pieces interconnect. I mean, think about it for a second. A lot of the time, you probably don't even know exactly what you want this thing to look like. How can we expect that the AI is going to go out there and build something that is vague even to us? And so this leads to those situations where you give it this idea for an app with some kind of vague instructions, and you get something out that it's like, I mean, yeah, this thing kind of works and I can click around, but it's not doing what I wanted it to do, right? It's missing that core spirit of what this thing meant to you. And so if you look at any great SaaS company, highly experienced product managers spend a lot of time with their senior engineers and senior developers collaborating for weeks and weeks on end to create these highly detailed feature specifications before they actually start building, right? Before they've written a single line of code. And so in this feature expansion step, we're doing the exact same thing. We're taking our architecture, we're taking our whiteboard plan, and we are starting to break it down into features, defining exactly what those features need to do and how they are going to think about doing it. And so this is nice because it creates very clear boundaries for each part of our app. So let me show you how we can use Manus to take that project architecture and build it down into robust feature specifications, even if you've never written a single line of code. So the real key here is that we're still not at that stage of trying to say, hey, tell me step by step what we're doing. Again, imagine we're that eagle, right? And we were circling around the top of the mountain in the clouds, getting a sense of the landscape. Now we've swooped down because we thought we saw some stuff moving in the trees, and we're trying to survey the land in a little bit of a more granular way. So this is more about user workflows, what is going to go where, how are those things going to interact. So again, we come in and we can copy paste in that prompt, which again, you can find in the free school group. And so what we're doing here is we are going to go through each feature that we have, and we are going to tell it for each feature, I want you to break down the goal of that feature, the API requirements or relationships of that feature to other pieces of the tool, detailed feature requirements, and then let's start thinking about an implementation guide, okay? And then we say for each feature, right? So for each feature that you are about to break down, I want to look at how it integrates with the high-level system architecture, what the database needs to look like to support this feature, what the API documentation needs to look like to support this type of feature, the front end, back end, how we're going to update different pieces of our app, the user experience, what the user experience workflow looks like, important security considerations for this type of feature, how we are going to test this feature, how we're going to manage our data, and how we are going to manage error handling. And then again, we are telling it, you do all of this in the context of everything that you just gave me. So that whole plan that we just had, that we just went through, the architecture, it's being passed in as context to this stage. And so as we can see, it does the same thing it did last time, where it reads that, it's going to ask you any questions if it has questions, and then it is going to fly, it's going to create its own plan, It's looking at the file structure it needs to have, all the relationships that we just discussed. It is going through and it is planning out how it's going to do that. When it's all done, we get this nice feature spec. And so there's a few things about this that are really cool. So first thing is we have our entire file system pre-laid out. So for example, in this React Native app using Expo, what does the entire front end repository need to look like? It's considering all the different features that we have, and it is building out the structure of our application based on that. It then does the same thing for our Node.js backend, right? It's going through and it's building out all the controllers, all the routes, all the services, everything we would need. And then, like I said, for each feature, it's going to go through. So let's pick out a different feature. So we're going to go through each feature and we are going to start drilling down a layer. And so if this were like a pyramid, for example, we were at the tippity top before, and now we're in like that chunky, beefy mid layer of the pyramid. And so let's take this AI-powered news feed, for example. We have what the goal of the feature is, right? Deliver a personalized feed of bias-free news, okay? What are the different services that are going to be involved in making requests to this type of feature? You're going to have a news service that fetches the stories. You're going to have your AI service that processes the headlines and scrubs the bias out of them. You're going to have your user service, which is looking at who you are as a user and what type of things you'd be interested in. Analytics service, which is going to look at how you're engaging with those stories, right? More for like app analytics. And then we can get even more detailed on that. So news content retrieval, right? A lot of requirements involved with something like that. Bias detection. A lot of requirements involved, right? You need to actually detect bias. You need to rewrite the headlines. You need to calculate a bias score and display it if you want to. You need to maybe look at bias trends in specific sources. And you need to preserve the actual factual information and be able to format that and send it back to the user, right? And so it's going through all of those different pieces and thinking through like, what are the real requirements of something like this? So we can see like a lot more detail that we're getting into. And then, like I said, we go through for this specific feature, right? Just this newsfeed piece, detailed implementation guide. So here's the system architecture considerations. You need to have a background service that's constantly fetching and processing data. You need to have your caching layer. You need to have all of these different things. Here's what the database table needs to look like. All the different fields you're going to have, right? Just so many different things, all the different API endpoints and what type of responses we need to expect out of them in order for this all to work. How to actually implement some of these things, like the infinite scroll. How to use like a flat list. We should use a flat list to do that. All of these sorts of things, and this is a huge output because, I mean, it's doing this for every single feature. And so this is another thing where, like, we're not running into these issues of context window sizes that we would in a tool like Claude, like just in their chat trying to do something like this. We just get so much fidelity, so much awesome detail in these responses that we have. Goes into security, right? Security is very important. So how's the authentication and data protection and payment security and all of this type of stuff going to work? And again, we have this opportunity now, zooming back out for a second, to say, hey, I like how some of these things are shaping up, but I don't like how some of these other things are shaping up. And we can do like a little bit of like a recursive, iterative feedback cycle with the system to make sure this is trending the way that we want it to, that there's nothing that seems like, I really don't want it to be like that. So now in like a real world context, a real world environment, instead of some vague feature that we would pass to cursor and say, okay, make me an algorithm that scrapes the bias out of headlines and returns the user only the unbiased headline. We now have this really detailed set of feature specifications. And so this level of detail is getting us to the point of what separates an amateur project from vibe coding something that's actually professional and cool. And users can tell when you've put this amount of detail into something that you're building. So now with those features really clearly outlined, we want to build a high fidelity, step-by-step list of tasks that we can pass to a tool like Cursor. And so again, going back to that analogy of the eagle, it started off at the very top, swirling around in the clouds, right? Then it swooped down and was surveying a forest area and looking at all the different trees and rocks and the river and the larger animals that it wouldn't be able to pick up with its talons on the ground. doing their little thing. And then it decides it's going to make a dive to a specific area where it knows there is prey. And so now we're getting down to that level of we're in the dive, right? We're very close to the ground and we're needing to make those more detailed, high fidelity decisions about what to do now. So again, we started off with this kind of broad idea of what we want, and we're layering on more details the further down we go. So the AI, it's not even just helping us code. It's helping us plan and learn about the thing we are building. It's helping us uncover the things that to us are unknown unknowns, right? If you're not a software developer, you probably don't know a lot about this stuff, about the security considerations, DevOps considerations, thinking about how you're going to scale an app the right way. It's helping us uncover those things so that we can think about it and say, that's a good point. I need to figure that out. Can you recommend me a solution for that? So if this was a microscope, we started off at like a 2x zoom, then we went to a 200x zoom, and now we're about to go look at some atoms under a microscope with a 200,000 times zoom. Don't quote me on that ratio. So we're getting to step 3, which is detailed task planning. And so this is like kind of the final hurdle. And it's the one, interestingly, that a lot of us think of as like the hurdle, which is what coding with an AI tool is doing, right? Doing the actual like coding of things. So what we're doing here is we're getting it ready to actually be written now. So the output of this stage that we're about to go through is what you're going to paste into a tool like Cursor. And so we need to take that detailed feature specification that we just went through, and we need to say, I need you to build this from the ground up into a step-by-step plan. And so professional developers might call this decomposition, where we're taking a larger feature and we are breaking it down into very granular tasks that need to be solved. And that is a skill that takes years, if not decades, to master and do very well. And so this is where we can then have the confidence to go to a tool like Cursor and say, hey, go do this thing in this specific way. And we know that it is now tied to this broader overall thing that we are controlling that is a cohesive plan that we know is going to work. And it's just knocking out the individual steps, right? And so if we were going to, for example, teach a kid to tie his shoes, step 1 was, explaining that, hey, you need to tie your shoes so that you don't trip. And there's these things called laces that you have. Step 2 was explaining that, hey, in order to like tie your shoes, though, you need to think about like how you weave them together so that they form a nice little bow and don't fall apart. And now step 3, we're telling them you need to go over and out, left to right, do a loop-de-loop, and pull them tight. SpongeBob reference. So again, what we're going to do is we are going to paste in our prompt, right? And so here we have it. And the real difference with this one is that we now have this section where it is breaking down tasks, right? So if the task was build the infinite scroll for the newsfeed, we're going to break down what are all the individual steps of that. Maybe it's like build the front end UI for it, build the back end endpoint, connect the front end to the back end endpoint, right? Is breaking down like the details of that, the paths or the files rather that need to be changed, what is changing about them. And then we're again looping through and repeating this process for every single task in this step. And then it proceeds to the next step and the next step and the next step until that feature is done. And then it moves to the next feature and repeats the process. So if we were to go pop that open and look at it, we can see our exact step-by-step plan. And now this is where the magic happens, because we can take each of these steps and we just pump them into an app like Cursor to go out and actually do the stuff, right? So let's say this one, for example, I could literally come through here. I could copy this entire step like this. And now I can just paste in that entire first step that we had, go send. And this thing is off to the races, and it is going to knock out everything in order. And there we go. We can see this thing is flying. It's creating functional code based on the task descriptions. Now, if you wanted to even avoid this, you could put it on the YOLO mode where it will go through and it will automatically run all of these commands so that you don't need to sit there to hit yes at each step. And so this task-based approach is huge for people that want to vibe code really awesome stuff that works. Instead of pumping some basic, generic, vague idea into a tool like Cursor, we can spend a little bit of time in that planning process so that we have this really robust, really long step-by-step task list to feed it. And so here we looked at one or two of the steps, but as you can see, this is a huge document. There are countless steps in here, probably shit ton of steps. And so what I love about this approach is that you can build really detailed stuff, really complex stuff, but still have a high level understanding of what is going on. And so I've seen complete beginners build professional apps in as little as a few weeks using systems like this that spend more time than is common in the planning stage to make sure the output is really awesome. Now, this just scratches the surface of what's possible. You could use something like this to build your own API documentation for a project you already have, or use it to help build out more and more and more features on top of what you already have by passing maybe your code base in as context to Manus. In a sense, we've taken what I think makes tools like Replit so good for beginners, which is helping you plan those technical pieces and the technical execution, and we've put it into a much more configurable and controllable format inside of a tool like Manus. And again, the reason this process works so well is because it follows the same structured approach that actual real-life software developers use when they're building the projects that we all use, know, and love. And so by combining Manus for planning and tools like Cursor or Windsurf for coding or implementation, you can build sophisticated apps and join that cabal of next-generation SaaS founders that are building their own futures. So if you found this video helpful, consider subscribing, because the next series of videos is going to be showing how we use this plus my UX design prompts to build a master plan and actually take a full app through to completion, including building the thing, testing the thing, and deploying the thing to get it in real people's hands. That is it for this video. I will see you in the next one.